They called us Deathworlders, a word meant as an insult. A reminder that we were born on a planet too violent, too cruel, too dangerous for civilized life. To them, humanity was a mistake of evolution, wild, savage, destined to burn itself out. But they were wrong. For 30 years, we bent our knees at the Galactic Council, endured their arrogance, their mockery, their endless restrictions. We obeyed every rule, swallowed every slight, hoping for respect. We thought patience would earn us a place among the stars. Instead, they laughed. They voted to seize our colonies, strip away our sovereignty, and cage us like children who couldn't be trusted with fire. They thought we would surrender quietly. But humans do not surrender. Not to the cold of the void, not to the beasts of our homeworld, and certainly not to those who mistake cruelty for civilization. Our fleets are smaller, our weapons fewer, but our world was forged in storms, sharpened in wars, tempered by a planet that demanded resilience or death. We carry in our veins a truth no alien council ever understood. Survival is our birthright. And when the Concord fleet came to enforce their so-called protection, they discovered the cost of underestimating humanity. Because Deathworlders do not bow. We fight. We endure. We burn brighter when the void closes in. The galaxy thought it knew what humans were. But what will it do when it learns what we become in war?
On the colony world of New Britannia, life moved with a fragile, hopeful rhythm. Children chased each other through narrow streets lined with half-finished buildings, their laughter echoing against steel walls not yet weathered by time. Farmers bent over soil still stubborn from terraforming, coaxing green shoots from alien Earth. Families gathered at night in community halls where the smell of bread and the hum of generators mixed into something that felt almost like home. Governor Robert Mills often walked those streets at dusk, hands clasped behind his back, listening to the soft cadence of life. He carried the burden of responsibility like a cloak, but it was sights like these, the tiny victories of ordinary people, that reminded him why the struggle was worth it. On the orbital station above, Captain Lena Park leaned over a console, sipping bitter coffee that tasted faintly of metal. Her ship, Relentless, was a destroyer, sleek, fast, and undermanned. She and her crew had drilled for years, but real war felt like a distant thundercloud. Most nights, her officers shared jokes, traded stories of Earth, or argued over who would win the next zero-gravity sparring match. Yet, beneath the laughter, there lingered a quiet unease, an unspoken question. Would it ever come to a fight? Back on Earth, Ambassador Claire Hoffman prepared her notes for another council session on Station Harmony 7. 30 years of diplomacy had given her patience, but patience frayed under the weight of alien arrogance. She still remembered her father's stories of old wars, how nations once clawed at each other for dominance. Now she stood in polished halls of glass and starlight, trying to prove humanity could be something better. But too often, the council's eyes, cold, amused, dismissive, told her the truth. They didn't see equals. They saw upstarts, outsiders, Deathworlders. The colony children dreamed of futures as engineers, pilots, scientists, futures that assumed safety. Families saved credits for new schools, new farms, new hospitals. But above the peace, cracks were forming. Alien trade routes had shifted mysteriously, cutting off supplies. Patrols from Concord vessels lingered too close to human borders. And in hushed conversations, miners whispered about entire convoys vanishing without explanation. It was small things at first. A shipment of medical supplies delayed by security inspections. A council debate where Raythani delegates smirked while calling humans unstable. Reports of alien ships shadowing civilian transports. Governor Mills dismissed the rumors when he could. He wanted to believe peace would hold, that after decades of struggle, humanity had finally carved out a home among the stars. But at night, as he stared out over the colony from his office window, a gnawing thought kept him awake. We are still not welcome here. Captain Park felt it too. In her dreams, she saw fleets gathering in the void, faceless commanders plotting the downfall of her people. She woke to the hum of her destroyer, heart pounding, and reminded herself it was only a dream. Yet every drill felt sharper. every exercise more urgent, as if instinct itself was warning her to be ready. And Hoffman, who had sat across from alien leaders and smiled through their condescension, knew better than most. She could see it in their sidelong glances, in their carefully chosen words. They had already made their decision. They were circling, waiting, testing humanity's patience, humanity's limits. The galaxy thought Earth would bend forever, that its colonies would remain fragile, dependent, too fearful to defy. But beneath the quiet streets of New Britannia, in the steel halls of the relentless, and in the weary determination of an ambassador's eyes, the seeds of resistance were already growing. The storm had not yet broken, but the air was thick with its promise. And when it came, it would not find humanity unprepared. If this glimpse into humanity's fragile peace before the storm resonates with you, subscribe now, because what follows will test every hope, every sacrifice, every spark of resilience we have left. The first sign was quiet. A routine transmission cut short. Then another. Sensors that had always hummed reassurance across human space went thin and ragged like stretched wire. For days, the concorded vessels loitered at the borders, massive silhouettes against the stars, perfectly still, like predators waiting for the moment a herd stepped into the open. Nobody could explain the hesitation. Nobody could explain the calm before the blow. Fear seeded itself in little things. Convoys arrived late. Harvests went uncollected because workers were held up at orbital checkpoints. Mothers whispered about ration delays. Captain Lena Park watched the feed from her bridge more often than she slept. On the display, the concorded ships moved with cold precision. Too few gestures, too much confidence. They were not probing. They were preparing. And then the concorded acted with a cruelty that had no pretense of honor. A message came through to New Britannia. Surrender the colony for concordant oversight, accept protection, hand over governance, or we will enforce the vote. The council had smiled and signed. The concorded were smug. Their first demonstration of protection came not at a military target, but at a civilian habitat ring. An orbital station, children in school, families in hydroponic pods was struck. A single particle beam lanced through the hull. The station tore like paper. Pieces of it spun off into silent, glittering death. 3,000 voices were swallowed by the vacuum. The screens across human systems filled with the same image, a new star blooming where life had been. For a moment, there was only stunned silence. Then a terrible, raw sound rose from every planet and ship where humans watched. Anger. Not the slow, polite anger of diplomats. Not the measured outrage of council chambers. A hot, primitive fury that gathered in throats and fists in naval briefing rooms. Governor Robert Mills stood in the command center and felt that fury like a physical thing. He had not wanted this. He had spent years building schools, negotiating trade, negotiating peace. But watching children vaporize in orbit changed the arithmetic of patience. He ordered evacuations. He ordered defenses. He also ordered restraint, because restraint still mattered. The concorded would test lines. They would watch for a flinch. They would use every cruelty to confuse principle with weakness. Captain Park's destroyer, the Relentless, cut through the black like a blade. She and her crew caught the concorded fleet on the far side of New Britannia's orbit. The concorded capital ships had assumed distance made them invulnerable. Their doctrine insisted on it. They had forgotten one human advantage. Our ships could take punishment. Humans could survive. Park dove in close, threading the debris of the fallen station like a swimmer through wreckage, and struck at carriers that had thought themselves untouchable. Missiles found soft points. Railguns tore through hangars. Small fighters swarmed where the concorded had thought there would be no carriers at all. It was glorious and terrible. Human crews watched comrades fall in streaks of light. Whales replaced orders. Pilots who had once joked about home and lovers were suddenly burning bright and gone. The concorded responded with monstrous efficiency. Capital beams took out a destroyer in a single sizzling strike. The Relentless bore wounds. The decks were a red map of spilled blood. And still, Park ordered the ship forward. Facing this onslaught, Admiral Hayes made a decision that would be dissected for generations. He drafted a doctrine of brutal pragmatism. The concorded fought with rules, little boxes and polite distance that they believed made them superior. Hayes would throw those rules away. Speed, close-quarter strikes, sacrificial feints and boarding tactics the concorded had never trained for. Make the cost of occupation unbearable. Make their sailors fear capture. Make them count every ship as a bargaining chip. If the Concordat had wanted a chess match, Hayes would flip the board. The next engagements were textbook carnage. Human frigates dove between carrier arcs and tore out engines. Boarding teams, Marines, fast and quiet, cut through holes and opened bulkheads the way a thief finds window locks. Concorded crews, bred for long-range duels and diplomatic warfare, found themselves flailing in corridors, their elegant doctrines useless in cramped, blood-slicked passageways. Ships that had been symbols of the Concordat's prestige became prizes, boarded and flown by human hands. But victory tasted like iron. For every Concorded cruiser crippled, a human destroyer burned. For every boarding success, dozens of civilians in occupied sectors vanished in reprisals. The Concordat escalated in return. They began to strike with subtle malice, sabotaging supply lines, blockading medical convoys, and targeting agricultural complexes to starve colonies into submission. Hope thinned. Dread became a daily companion. Citizen councils turned to guerrilla councils. Teachers became saboteurs, nurses smuggled weapons tucked inside medical crates. Farmers learned how to set ambushes in the sunless patches between terraforming rigs. Resistance took shape like a living thing, imperfect, ugly, ruthless when it had to be. Governor Mills sat with a ragged group of volunteers one night and watched as ordinary people turned their grief into plans. We don't win every battle. We make every inch cost them enough to think, to hesitate. Every ambush, every boarding, every desperate ram and sacrifice amplified the myth of the Deathworlder. The Concordat saw not savagery now, but a terrifying calculus. Humans would burn, bite, and bleed to make victory too costly to taste. Their high command sent fresh fleets larger than before, convinced that numbers would drown us. They did not understand why human faces hardened instead of crumpling. On a black field outside of Proxima, a planned retreat turned into a trap. Human destroyers fell back as if fleeing, always a few too slow, leaving gaps that glittered with the promise of easy kills. Then mines blinked, like a field of stars in betrayal, and hidden platforms opened fire. Human vessels that had been pretending to flee turned and struck, cutting engines, ramming, embedding themselves into carriers so that boarding teams could pour through the wounds. The Concordat formation, once a perfect serried mass, broke and buckled. Fear was the first response. Then came the rage, broad and volcanic. But the final shape of humanity's answer was a cold, steady defiance. We did not simply fight. We turned our losses into lessons. We accepted sacrifice as currency and invested it where it stung the enemy most. We refused to kneel. And yet, even as the tide began to curl in human favor, a new, darker thread slithered across the map. Whispers of biological payloads, of stealth transports on lonely trajectories heading for the heart of human space. Intelligence intercepted fragments. A voice, anonymous and trembling, warned of a shipment bound for Earth. Admiral Hayes plunged into a calculus no commander wanted to make. Intercept or let it roll on? Board and risk release. Destroy and risk contamination. He stared at the projections until the bridge lights blurred. There was no clean choice, only a terrible urgency. What would he choose? What would they all be willing to lose to keep a world alive? Comment below, do you think humanity could survive in a galaxy that expects us to bow? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
The bioweapon transport was silent, gliding through the void with the arrogance of inevitability. Its stealth field bent the starlight around it, rendering it a ghost until the destroyer Relentless 2 caught its shadow. Captain Elisa Chen stared at the distortion on her screen, jaw clenched. The readings were faint, but undeniable. Mass signatures, biological containment units, cold silence where there should have been heat signatures. She felt the dread settle in her gut like lead. They are aiming for Earth. Her crew watched her, waiting for the words that would seal their fates. She swallowed once and gave the order. Target engines, fire. Railgun rounds streaked into the dark. One struck home. The stealth field collapsed, and the transport shimmered into sight, an ugly, blunt craft, scarred and monstrous, carrying enough engineered death to scour a species. Emergency klaxons howled across the alien ship's hull as containment systems faltered.
A call flashed across Chen's comms. Admiral Hayes appeared, the weight of the entire human race carved into the lines of his face. "Captain, secure the payload if you can." She shook her head. "Negative, sir. The containment is breaking. If we board, we risk release. If we destroy, we risk scattering it across the system. The math doesn't work." Hayes' silence was long, heavy, suffocating. Then, finally, he said, "Find another way." Chen lowered her gaze. There is no other way. Around her, her bridge crew realized the truth. Some faces blanched, others hardened. No one spoke of escape. No one argued. They had all sworn the same oath. They had all seen the orbital station burn, the children die, the arrogance of a council that called their people primitives. If humanity needed another sacrifice, then they would be it. "All hands," Chen said over ship-wide comms, her voice steady as steel. "The Concorded tried to erase us with shadows. We will answer with fire. Abandon ship if you must, but know this: I will finish the mission. I will see this through." Silence greeted her. Then her tactical officer, eyes bright with tears, shook his head. "Captain, we're staying." Around the bridge, one by one, they nodded. Engineers, gunners, comms officers, all of them. No one left. Chen swallowed hard, pride and grief colliding in her chest. "Then let's make them remember." The relentless tube burned toward the transport at full thrust. The Concorded crew inside scrambled, broadcasting distress, trying desperately to maneuver away. Too slow, too late. Humanity's destroyer howled like a vengeful ghost, fire bleeding from her engines. Chen's final words carried across the stars. For Earth, for humanity, for the future. Impact. A star bloomed where ship met ship, a white-hot blossom that outshone the heavens for an instant. In that moment, billions of tons of steel, fuel, and flesh turned into pure annihilation. The bioweapon was gone, burned, broken, erased by the sacrifice of a few hundred souls who chose extinction on their own terms. On Earth, citizens standing in plazas looked up at the sky as the flash appeared. They did not yet know what it meant. They only knew it was beautiful. Admiral Hayes bowed his head when the transmission cut out. He allowed himself one breath, one raw, broken whisper before facing his staff again. He said, "They gave everything. Now we make their sacrifice mean something." And humanity did. Operation Hammerfall was unleashed. 3 human fleets tore into Concorded core worlds simultaneously. For the first time in 1,000 years, war came to alien capitals that had believed themselves untouchable. Ruthani Prime burned under precision strikes. Morvani orbital platforms shattered. Palaeon defenses crumbled before marine boarding pods. Humanity did not seek annihilation. They sought to prove a lesson, one the Concorded had refused to learn. That war was not a game of doctrine and pride. That survival demanded teeth, claws, and fire. Marines stormed government halls. Admirals broadcast defiance across enemy frequencies. And everywhere, the same message carried. You called us Deathworlders. You meant it as an insult. You were wrong. It is our strength. Images seared themselves into history. Marines raising the human flag over alien fortresses. Destroyers ramming battleships 3 times their size, taking both down in flames. Ordinary colonists striking back with sabotage that shattered supply lines. Fear spread through the Concorded ranks faster than orders. Ships surrendered rather than face capture. Entire fleets faltered when human voices snarled across their comms, "We are coming." But even in victory's roar, the cost was written in blood. Human casualty lists scrolled endlessly across command screens. The memorial wall back on Earth grew longer by the hour. Hayes carried every name like a blade in his chest. At last, Primus Tal, the arrogant Ruthani who had mocked humanity as unstable, was dragged before the human Marines, defiant even in defeat. His words spat venom, threats, curses, but his eyes betrayed something new, something alien leaders had not felt for centuries: fear. Humanity had stood against impossible odds. Humanity had paid in lives and tears and sacrifice. Humanity had won. And yet, the war was not over. Hayes stared at the tactical display. A rogue fleet was moving towards Earth, commanded by an alien desperate enough to burn the cradle of humanity. The battle for survival had only shifted. As his officers prepared for the final defense, Hayes whispered to himself, to the ghosts of Chen, Park, and every fallen soul, "You wanted to see what Deathworlders could do. Now you know, and we are not finished." If this stand gave you chills, share this story. Let others feel the fire of humanity's defiance. The war ended not with a single battle, but with exhaustion. Concorded fleets shattered, their pride burned out among the stars. Human colonies scarred, their skies littered with debris that would orbit for generations. The galaxy was quieter, but the silence felt heavy, like a room still echoing with screams. On New Britannia, the capital square was filled with scaffolding, engineers and civilians working side by side. The skeletal remains of buildings stood as monuments to defiance, while new schools and hospitals rose from the rubble. A black stone obelisk towered at the center, names etched in gold of those who had fallen in orbit, those who had resisted occupation, those who had bought the future with their lives. At the top of the obelisk was a single word: relentless. Governor Mills laid a hand against the cold surface and whispered a promise, not of revenge, not of conquest, but of memory. The children who skipped past him, human and alien alike, would not remember the fire in detail, but they would live because others had stood unbroken. That, he thought, was victory. On Earth, Admiral Hayes stood in the shadow of another memorial, thousands of names shimmering in the morning light. His granddaughter climbed onto his lap, clutching a storybook. "Grandpa, did we win because we were the strongest?" she asked. Hayes's throat tightened. He thought of Captain Park ramming her destroyer, of Captain Chen driving her ship into a bioweapon transport, of nameless Marines storming alien corridors with no hope of survival. He thought of millions who had never worn uniforms but had resisted all the same. "No," he said softly. "We won because we refused to break, because we paid the price no one else dared to pay." The little girl tilted her head, puzzled, but nodded solemnly. She would understand one day. The galaxy understood sooner. Where once alien leaders had sneered at humanity, now they measured their words with care. Where once they mocked Deathworlders, now they invoked the name with caution and with respect. Out of fear at first, but then slowly out of recognition. Humanity had proved it could endure, that it could not be bent. But more importantly, when the chance for vengeance came, it chose something harder: to build, to forgive, to lead. The Joint Defense Academy opened months later, its first graduating class a mix of human and alien cadets. They saluted as one, pledging not to dominate, but to defend. Claire Hoffman, now High Commissioner, told them that the greatest legacy of war was not the battles won, but the determination to ensure those battles never needed to be fought again. Across the galaxy, whispers spread. The Deathworlders were dangerous, yes, but they were also builders of peace. Humanity had shifted from the margins to the center, not by begging for a seat at the council, but by carving it out in blood and sacrifice. That was the cost of survival. That was the burden of victory. And yet, as night fell over Earth, and the stars came out one by one, Admiral Hayes stood by the window and allowed himself the smallest of smiles. Humanity had been underestimated, mocked, cornered. But now a new truth echoed in every system, every council chamber, every ship's comm channel. We are Deathworlders. We endure. We fight. We lead. And somewhere in that endless dark, the galaxy listened. If this ending gave you goosebumps, hit like, subscribe, and join us again for more epic HFY stories. Humanity's story is just beginning.